The U.S. government has provided military aid to corrupt oil-producing nations, but it's also supporting EITI. Is there a tension there, and what's driving the foreign policy?
That's a good one.
I can help you out, Steve.
Which one of you wants to scramble for those two?
We know who that missile was aimed at.
Specifics? Honestly, it's hard for me to answer without knowing what the cases are, and even if you gave them to me, I mean, I'm not sure I'd be fully familiar with them. Well, I think I think it's true that if you look at any specific country, and take Nigeria as an example, it's a very large, very important country in Africa, a country that's made progress towards democratization. We're hoping that the upcoming elections will go well. Tremendous disputes, I mean, we can see in the run-up to the elections, an important oil producer. This will be inescapably a multifaceted relationship. I mean, there's no way of getting around that. I mean, as it has been for many other countries that we've been engaged in that are oil exporting states. And there isn't a way in which we can say we're going to go down path A alone, or path B alone, or path C alone. So in looking at these issues, I mean, we do have to take account of the complexity of the environment that we're dealing with.
Bennett, you said you wanted to...
Yeah, just quickly. I mean, look, the U.S. government has a military-to-military relationship with Nigeria that was restored after the restoration of democracy back in '99, and that's not going to change. But there are some things that we can be doing to help mitigate some of the human rights risks, in particular, as we've seen the situation in the Niger Delta deteriorate and the whole, the situation get increasingly violent and even militarized. One thing that the U.S. government can be doing is facilitating or even conducting on its own, if it's got the credibility these days, I have to add, to do human rights training with the Nigerian security forces. Another thing it can be doing is to be offering much more robust support than it has to date to the voluntary principles on security and human rights, of working directly with the oil companies in the Niger Delta in minimizing their risk of complicity with the security forces and crackdowns that might result in fatalities and human rights risks. There's a very specific agenda that can be pursued that's only been addressed in fits and starts by the U.S. and the U.K. and other governments with the Nigerians. With respect to Equatorial Guinea, and drawing on some experience of having dealt with that country from the Human Rights Bureau at the State Department at the end of the previous administration, and thinking then very hard about whether it was reasonable to approve some explorations by one or more U.S.-based security assistance firms to the government of Equatorial Guinea. It's my view that U.S. security firms should not be operating in Equatorial Guinea and supporting that regime and its security forces without trying to do very specific security training with those forces. And I'm not sure that that's happening in any serious way, even though there was talk of doing that several years ago. One could actually make a far more fundamental argument that we should have no relationship whatsoever on the part of the U.S. military or U.S.-based security contractors with any aspect of the security forces of Equatorial Guinea, given the gross human rights abuses that continue to occur in that country. But at a very minimum, I think that we need to take a very hard look at what security contractors may be doing there, and be sure that at a minimum they're trying to integrate human rights training into whatever broader training they're doing with the security forces.
Could I just add?
Yes, please, Steve.
Two more words on some things that we've tried to do in terms of protecting civil society. Bennett's old bureau, DRL, published in December a set of NGO principles. That is how NGOs ought to be treated at a global level. I know we haven't done very well in disseminating this because Simon and I were talking about it this morning and he wasn't aware of it. Mm-hmm. But They're out there, and it's something that we're trying to push, since we're seeing around the world, I mean, a number of countries that have tried to constrain the activities of NGOs. And Secretary Rice did announce in December on Human Rights Day, I think it's $1 million defense fund for civil society activists to provide them with assistance. So this is something that we have been attentive to.
That's good.
I have a lady back by the camera, and then Princeton. What? Excuse me? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, we didn't answer the. You want to take that on?
In a short answer, I'm not quite sure how to answer your question, because we've been trying to do something with Cambodia for 12 years now, and I still feel that we're banging our head on a post. And I think part of the reason for that is that the elite around the Prime Minister have only one interest, and that is asset stripping everything. That is what they do. That's what they've successfully done. And I'm stuck by the quandary between, I'm saying this as an external observer and someone who's not worked inside a government apparatus, but seeing it from a sort of civil society point of view, you very often come across, you have discussions about countries where there is a strategic significance because of oil or whatever. It's a big country, it's very powerful, it has a weight. And at that stage, then you're running up into the sort of barrier of, well, we can't rock the boat for all these strategic reasons. And then you go to the other end of the extreme, when you're not a country of strategic significance, to a country like Cambodia, which isn't. And then it's too low on the agenda to do anything about. So somehow, that might sound very cynical, but the reality in Cambodia has been 12 years of donor assistance, paying half the national budget. Nothing has moved. And the answer to that, really, to be absolutely blunt about it, is nobody really wants to address, in any systematic way, in my opinion at least, the fact that the Prime Minister, his wife, the Deputy Prime Minister, all the military commanders, asset strip everything they can get their hands on, whether it's artifacts off Angkor Wat, whether it's oil about to be, whether it's the monopoly over current petroleum distribution, or the forests which were once plentiful and now somewhat ravaged, despite our 10 years of banging our head on the post with them about that, and so on and so forth. Nobody has ever stopped them in any effective way whatsoever. And the message they've got is that they can run rings around everyone, and that's exactly what they've done. And I think we, in this wider discussion, which is why I come back to mandatory disclosure mechanisms, really, is that, yes, we must deliver EITI, and we must get it as far as we can, but I'm not clear in my head whether EITI is the right mechanism to address in these most difficult countries, because to consider, unless there's a regime change, and I'm not suggesting we go and bomb them or something like that, but jokes aside, I don't know what else you can do other than freeze their assets and make, because, I think to a certain extent, some of these dictators, because I think that's the only way to look at it, really, to some extent become prisoners of their own situation. They survive in this place by meting out violence whenever necessary in a nasty way, and if they get cornered, the violence gets worse, and they survive off the capacity to pay off or liberate favours to people underneath them. And if one was to make sure that those favours got frozen, it's not much fun being a dictator and looting the assets of your country if you can't go shopping on the Champs-Élysées, right? So let's stop the shopping on the Champs-Élysées.
Go to the
Lady in the back.
Hi, my name is Madiha Ashraf, and I work for the Office of Central African Affairs at the State Department. And I just wanted to say for the record, we are not providing military assistance to Equatorial Guinea, just to kind of correct that.
But we do, though, isn't there at least one U.S.-based private military or security contractor that's
There is, yes. And
are there any human rights provisions built into their?
There are. We had, it took us about a year to approve the license because of human rights concerns, and we have required that there be human rights training.
Good.
Last question, Princeton.
Thank you, Princeton Lyman, Council on Foreign Relations. Perhaps a question for Mr. Krasner, but others. We've talked about bringing other countries into EITI who are producing exploration countries. We talk a lot about China, but there are a lot of players out there. There's India, there's Malaysia, there's Brazil, there's South Korea. Is there an effort, and I don't know where the leverage is or the incentives are, but because of the competition maybe there are, to bring in a wider variety of countries, not just China, but the others who are becoming much more active? Because if we don't, then the alternatives for these countries is even greater.
Yeah, let me say quickly, I am familiar with what we've done on China. I believe that we've also approached India, but I am not certain. So I don't know how widespread this is.
Just long term, I think that would be desirable, and I think one of the things that civil society can play through this way we've been able to communicate through the board and separately is to pass the message out to all the other diplomatic missions and get whoever does have influence to try and bring different countries in. So,
one thing about China, and nobody knows this better in Washington and Princeton, given the focus you've put in recent months on China's oil interests in Africa, but there's been some suggestions by Andrew Natsios and others in recent weeks that the Chinese are concerned over the situation in Sudan is not entirely inconsistent with some of our concerns here, and that there are some conversations with them, and in turn conversations that they're having in Khartoum. And the reason I point that out is that I don't think we should give up on China at the risk of sounding naive. The Sudan issue, I think, has the potential collateral benefit of beginning to focus the Chinese government and the oil companies on some of the global responsibilities that multinational oil companies have to exercise in the 21st century. And it's going to be a very long, hard process with the Chinese companies and governments and with the others that Princeton points out. But I don't think that it is a foregone conclusion that there cannot be a day X years down the road, maybe even a high single-digit number of years down the road, that China cannot be part of the EITI framework. We cannot give up on that, in my view, and we can maybe build on some of the perceptions that might be shifting a little bit per Sudan.
Can I just add one thing? This administration is by no means giving up, and I didn't mean to imply for a second that was the case. When Bob Zoellick, when he's Deputy Secretary of State, looked at China and said, really what China has to be is a responsible stakeholder in the international system. EITI membership is part of that. We've raised the issue with the Chinese. We believe that they're listening. It's been raised not just by Bob Zoellick, but by others in the administration, by Assistant Secretary Fraser. So this is an issue which we're pursuing, and we're pursuing in a way and trying to emphasize to the Chinese, as I said before, that joining EITI would be something that would be in their interest.
Absolutely.
Not just something that is kind of out there as just a gesture that they might make.
I agree.
Panelists, thank you for a wonderful job.
I should say thank you to you for hosting it.
Let me,
Oops. If you're not destroying your microphone.
let me reiterate appreciation to all of the panelists for really a very stimulating discussion this afternoon. I've been traveling the past 4 weeks, and so I just want to express a personal word of appreciation to Rosalind Teku of my own staff and to Sasha Leshnev of Global Witness, who really helped to put together the logistical preparations for today's event, part of which are the refreshments that lie outside this auditorium. So to all of you today for participating in this conversation on a really vital subject, thank you so much.
Thank you.